Hello and good evening from London. It's Orna Ross here from the Alliance of Independent Authors, and I am speaking this evening about a subject that I know is of great interest to a lot of you. It seems that as soon as an author has worked out how to sell books to readers, the next thing their mind turns to is how to sell rights to rights buyers. And we've had a couple of very interesting seminars around that whole issue in 2014, and this is our final ALLi Insight seminar of 2014, and I'm really delighted to have with me this evening Seth Dellon from PubMatch. PubMatch is an Alliance partner member and a new way to sell your rights to rights buyers who'd be interested. So I will let Seth introduce himself and tell us a little bit more about PubMatch, and then we have lots of questions that we want to ask him. Good evening, Seth.
Sure. Hey, Orna. It's afternoon here in New York, and we're getting ready for Thanksgiving, which I'm really looking forward to. But anyway, I will introduce myself. I'm Seth Dellon with PubMatch. I help develop the network and our business partners, including ALLi. PubMatch is really a marketing tool for publishers, agents, and authors to connect with each other, promote rights that they're trying to sell, find books with available rights, find available rights in general, communicate, make connections, and we have a few different tools that our members could use to promote their rights both on the PubMatch system and off the PubMatch system.
Fantastic. And I'm hoping that we'll also be joined by Tom Chalmers, who runs IPR License, and they are a similar but a little bit different operation working here in London in the UK. So you guys obviously are very tuned in to the US end of things. Tell us first of all a little bit about why should a writer be thinking about selling their rights at all? Are they not better to just concentrate on selling books?
Well, I think selling rights is part of selling books. One of the edicts that we always use is that promoting your books to readers is really important, but promoting your books to the industry is really important. And part of doing that, or one thing that could result from promoting your book to the industry, is finding partners around the world to sell your books. There is sort of a misconception that because your book's on Amazon, it's available everywhere, and that is true. The book is available anywhere, but you know, if somebody is in Greece and they stumble upon your book, they might not have any idea what your book is, what it's about, or anything like that if they don't speak English or whatever languages you published it in. So selling rights, what that does is that helps you create local, accessible editions of your book. So you could sell your rights, say, to a publisher in Greece who will translate it and they'll promote it. So, you know, being a self-published author, you know, in theory, you own pretty much all of the rights to your book, and anything you could think of, whether it's a different language or a different format or a movie or a toy or any sort of aspect of your idea, is something that you could sell.
Fantastic, and we'll come back to you on that in a moment, but I think we've been joined by Tom. Tom is here with us this evening. Hi, Tom.
Hi, how are you?
We're very well, thank you. Seth is with us from New York. I'm assuming you're here in London.
Yes, I'm here in London. How are you, Seth?
Not bad. About you?
Yeah, no, I'm all good, thanks.
Great. Well, Seth has just been giving us the smallest rundown, or the introduction, really, the first salvo as to why authors should think about selling rights. And I know that's something you've got lots to say about. Do you want to tell us why do you think an author should concentrate on this?
Well, I guess the message we often put out there is it's natural, and it's something publishers have gone through in the past, that authors think of their book as they see the book as the end product, you know, the end thing of all that work. Well, actually, that's only one entity from actually the main and most valuable thing they own, which is actually their intellectual property. This big, and actually that can easily be undervalued. The example I always give, which gave me the idea for IPR License initially, was when I first started my first publishing company in 2005. But in some ways, I was in a similar position as an author. I just hadn't written the books of starting out, that I thought the second novel we published, I remember just thinking, well, why don't I try and license the rights to this, and ended up I didn't actually even have a computer at the time. I was using an internet cafe and ended up licensing the rights into 7 editions and 4 languages. And I kind of thought, and it was immediately kind of checks coming in the post. So I kind of thought, well, there's something here, you know, and licensing's a multi-billion-pound industry, and it's something that it can sometimes sound a bit dry in terms of licensing, not as much as actually getting that book in your hands, but it's a huge area of value for authors.
Absolutely, and I think it excites authors a great deal. Now, you're both doing something sort of revolutionary, so just talk about, in the past, in order to sell rights, you could do what you did, Tom, if you were a very enterprising kind of person, and actually, you know, get out the directory of rights buyers and start to work through them and tell them about your project and so on. But as a writer, I think it would be fair to say, approaching rights buyers, you would have less, it would be a bit more challenging for you than if you're a publisher or an agent to actually reach the buyers and for them to take you seriously and so on. So talk to me a little bit, about how you thought about getting around this issue, Seth. So technology came along and made this a bit easier. So tell us a little bit about how PubMatch came to be.
Sure. Well, PubMatch came to be as sort of an extension of one of our core businesses. PubMatch, just so you all know, is actually a joint venture between 2 companies. Publishers Weekly, which is a large trade magazine that covers the publishing industry here in the U.S., and Combined Book Exhibit, which is a marketing company. And one of the things that Combined Book Exhibit does is they organize the USA Pavilion at big international book fairs around the world. And these international book fairs, like the Frankfurt Book Fair and the London Book Fair, the Beijing Book Fair, et cetera, those are considered rights events. That's where, you know, the Bologna Book Fair is where Harry Potter was sold. You know, Bloomsbury sold the rights to Scholastic to publish it in North America. Those are foreign rights. So as an extension of the USA Pavilion, we created PubMatch for a way for the U.S. publishers to sort of put their information out there. And it grew from there because they were involved in rights and concerning rights. So we just tried to build it out with tools to help people sell rights and fields to help people organize their information, and really a way to connect with each other from a discoverability standpoint.
And Tom, you ended up in a similar, though not entirely exactly alike, and we'll talk about some of the differences in a little while, but ended up in a similar place, but had quite a different trajectory and starting point, I think.
Yes, well, I guess in terms of, we've also kind of seen the book fairs and is a kind of hub of licensing where people go to, but, you know, in some ways, some publishers are still thinking about justifying that when they have hundreds of thousands of titles. If you're an author of 1 or 2 titles or 5 titles, are you going to fly to Frankfurt? And even if you are, you know, you should do, but are you going to get the right reception to be able to sell your rights? So we could see certainly something for, in actual fact, on our side, you know, we started off from my publishing background of thinking of publishers of, you know, we have 13 million titles now listed on our platform. But then we kind of, by extension, thought, well, there should be something here for authors as well. And in terms of, so I guess, so then we launched the author service, which has gone from strength to strength. You know, I think certainly, you know, I'm a big fan of PubMatch as well, and I think, you know, both Seth and his team and us see it's not kind of so much battle in the same ground. There's a vast opportunity here. You know, actually licensing is a multi-billion-pound industry, as I say, but that's only actually small amounts from people who have the resources to be at certain places or maybe have the rights teams. There's a vast ocean of rights licensing business out there, which, you know, I think there's room for lots of different services in order to pick that up.
And there is no doubt about that it is both, you know, it is a huge market as it is, and probably a growing one, you know, just as more books become available and more, you know, as countries that have not been so developed on the rights front get involved and get more set up around rights and so on. But at a real level, I think challenges still remain for authors. Could you talk to me, each of you, a little bit, Seth, again, you first perhaps, about those challenges? So, how successful are writers at actually transacting deals and so on PubMatch?
Well, the bread and butter of PubMatch from an author's perspective is just the ability to communicate. There's a lot of education that goes into selling rights. There's a lot of stuff that you need to know, like when you're selling to a market, like how you can price your rights and that sort of thing. So where we've had our most success is in just people communicating. So there's about 1,000 communications that go through the PubMatch network monthly, and sort of one of our edicts, as it were, is education. We're trying to work with groups like ALLi, other groups here in the States, and obviously Publishers Weekly, to just sort of get the word out on how to sell rights and why it's important to sell rights. So as part of that, advertising the rights that you actually have available for sale is something that we consider a success. We have a few thousand publishers on PubMatch and a few hundred agents that you could communicate with as an author. We put everybody on an equal playing field. So I think our biggest success, I would consider, is just being able to work with groups like ALLi to get the word out. Whether you use PubMatch, which is our product that we stand behind, or IPR, which is a really awesome platform, and I know that they're really interested in education as well. I think Tom would agree that both of us have the perspective where we need to educate authors about rights. Whether you're using PubMatch or you're using IPR or you have an agent yourself, learning about rights is a huge to-do, and we're both, and you too, Orna, I think we're all in the under the same agenda of trying to educate first before like pushing any sort of specific product or even statistics or knowledge on specific markets, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yes, Tom.
No, sorry, I was going to say, exactly, I think we find there's almost a two-step approach in that. Firstly, we have authors who, we do try and manage expectation to a degree, because we get lots of people who come on and say, well, this book's made for a film deal, we have film companies, or this should be huge in this country, or, there's a character who has a background in wherever, Mongolia, so therefore, we should be selling the rights out there. And we often end up saying, well, actually, what have you actually uploaded on the platform? Do you have the content ready? Is it in, a licensable state? Do you, we have all these, so it's almost a stage of try and help. Well, I guess in 3 stages. One is help authors fully, and there's a vast array of different levels people are at in terms of understanding rights licensing. 2, to prepare them for the market in a way, and then 3. We see deals going through the platform. We've had books where we've had completely speculative offers. And we've had others where we've worked on ourselves. We also have as well. We have a licensing team that we kind of want to stress that it is about the technology and the platform. That's the solution of getting out there in the market. But we also we have. Where we've had offers to authors work before, we've also helped actually get involved to help them with the negotiation process when they're not so confident. So, yeah, there's a whole kind of education and wraparound thing there in order to get the market ready to really make that huge kind of, billion-pound business specifically through authors. But yeah, I think we can all see the potential there.
Okay, so in terms of education, can you each give me your sort of top tip, if you like, for authors in terms of thinking about their rights and their right sales?
One tip, huh?
Top one, first of all. I find it useful to go for the top tip.
Sure. I think my top tip would be, especially for independent, empowered authors, a lot of independent, empowered authors don't necessarily want to work with a publisher, but from a rights perspective, it's almost the same process as getting published in your home market. you do have to give up control, so to speak, on the final product. So there's some concessions that you have to make that you don't necessarily want to make in your home market, but it's important to know that making those concessions is helping grow your market. It's not you own the rights, and you're selling the rights so that you can grow your market, so you could get those local readers in China. China's 1 billion people, that if you don't have a Chinese edition and you don't have somebody on the ground in China helping you sell books, you're not going to reach them. So you could still be an empowered, independent author with your product at home, but there is a level of control that you do have to give up when you're working with a publisher abroad. But it's really just to help you grow your market.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that we get a lot. If I'm indie minded, why would I think about selling my rights? And helping people to sort of understand, from our perspective, always a trade publisher, even in one's own language, can sometimes, perhaps with print as a subsidiary right, or some other, perhaps audiobooks or whatever. Being an independent author, as we define it, is very much about being the creative director of your work, being the person who controls and has the freedom to experiment and to look at all sorts of ways in which we can reach readers, and we certainly will see rights as being central to that. Tom, what's your top tip?
I'm enjoying Seth going first. It gives me some more time to think of something.
But we might surprise you in a minute, so stay on your toes.
Yeah, no, exactly. I would say, in terms of the top tip, which sounds quite a basic thing, but I would say it's have your work ready for licensing, in that. And there's various things. It's like going back to when I started out and did that licensing when I first started. There were basic things that I needed to have to enable that to happen. One is, which sounds obvious, but is a manuscript or whatever it is that's ready for licensing, that's complete, that the author's completely happy with, that's finished, that's in a state that will excite people, who are coming to it completely new, and then to have information about, descriptive information about it, quite things that can sound dry, but even categorization, which sometimes drives me mad, because I think publishers are too caught up on it who are acquiring, but actually, a lot of publishers are looking by specific area or specific type, so to kind of have it ready in that way, to have the materials ready, if there's any artwork or anything attached to it, have them ready to view. And so, yeah, that would be my first tip, is particularly if you're creating a listing on IPR, is to have all that information ready there, so they can immediately. So you think if a publisher's looking on such a wide range of a particular type of work, they're going to want to, if they find something they want to be interested in, they're going to want to see what they want there, or they're going to move on. So they want to be able to see, well, actually, this is interesting. Can I request a manuscript, or can I view it now? Is there a bit more information on it? It needs to quickly tick the boxes in order to get them engaged, and then once they're engaged, you can move on to the next step. So I would say, sometimes you say about knowledge of different markets, but actually the first step is having your work ready. So it will, publishers around the world are looking for great work to publish on a basic level, and so have that great work ready and easily accessible, I would say.
Yeah, if I could just add to that a little bit, also make sure that when it's ready that you own every part of it if you're going to be selling it. So if you're using, if it's a nonfiction work and you're citing something, make sure you have the right to sell that as part of your book. And if you're using images and you want to sell the images as part of your manuscript, then make sure that you have the right to sell those images too.
There's a sort of a feeling abroad in the indie community that rights buyers are not interested unless you've had significant sales in your home territory first, or globally through digitally and through KDP or whatever. Do you agree with that? I mean, the figure of 50,000 gets bandied about a lot. 50,000 over the past, over prior, say, 24 or 36 months. Is that something you've come across? Tom, we'll jump in on you this time.
And one thing I always say is, I think the hardest sell often is people who've had several books out in that kind of middle zone. I think debut is a massively sexy, important word that marketers, publishers like. If something's actually all publishers are looking for something first, or should be, to bring to the market. So to actually say, I don't necessarily think those sales, I don't know, there can sometimes be some lazy purchasing where you kind of see, well, here's the Nielsen sales list, let's acquire this, this, and this. But I think that's not the most interesting acquiring. Interesting acquiring is saying, well, here's something new. It's because you want something new in the market. It's like starting a business. You want to fill a gap. You don't just want to pile something on top. So I think debut, new, unpublished, unsold actually is an exciting thing. So I think people can get too hung up on those sales figures. I think new and quality is still what counts.
And are you seeing that? Are you actually seeing new debut unpublished writers selling on your site? I mean, you too are transactional. What sort of business are writers doing on IPR license?
I mean, it varies. I mean, they vary from probably the most high-profile author one we had was Mary Wood a while ago, who got a 7-book deal from Pam Macmillan. Who'd said she'd self-published several books, so I guess had shown a track record, which they saw. But then we had an offer come in a little while ago for just a completely random book that actually wasn't published yet, actually pure from manuscript. They saw the manuscript, the publisher thought this was interest, and made an offer for it. So it really does, it really does range. It is still, I don't want to make it sound like a walk in the park of kind of upload your thing and come in. It's a huge market with a lot of manuscripts out there, so you need to do what you can to get the best chance. But I think quality is still the most important thing. Certainly with my publishing hat on, we want to find quality that we can mold. We don't necessarily want to find something that sold 10,000 copies or whatever self-published that we might try and replicate. That's not exciting.
Okay. And from your end, Seth, we have a question here. What kind of rights can I sell? Mary wants to know. What rights are hers to sell, assuming she is an indie author, and assuming she has all rights to all her books.
Yeah. On PubMatch, we focus on foreign rights, so that's selling foreign language editions of your book to foreign publishers in foreign markets. So, like the Chinese rights to a Chinese publisher. I know that IPR also helps you with other types of things like movie rights and other sorts of licensing, and they also do partial book licenses. So they're sort of a one-stop shop for loads of stuff. But we focus on foreign rights. But as an independent author, I mean, you really, if you could think of it, you could sell it. And you could break things down. I mean, Hugh Howey, he's a hugely successful self-published author who managed to sell just his print rights to Simon & Schuster, which was sort of a big coup, a big exciting thing that happened in the industry. But as an independent author, I mean, you really have the sky's the limit. If you could think it, you could sell it. The Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, as you know it, and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, as we know it here. That book is 60-something different foreign language versions, and then there's the movies, and then there's the theme park, and the toys, and the coloring books, and all the stuff that goes with it. So if you have an idea that people are interested in, you could sell it. And I think the key word there is selling. You are giving somebody else your product to almost do what they want with. The devil's in the details there. But as an independent author, the rights are a huge opportunity for you to increase the income that you can get from your book.
Tom, do you have what rights do you think Mary can realistically sell, assuming that she has her book ready, as you said, and fit for licensing? What are the ones that sell most often or most likely to sell?
I mean, it varies. I mean, often the most straightforward ones, which is probably the actual English language rights. So, we selling it to whether to a US publisher, Indian publisher, or whatever it may be, same language, common rights are a huge market. Assuming it's fiction, in the fiction market, and then obviously translation's also a huge side. There's slight complications with obviously there's an extra cost of translation of publishers, but that's still a vast and exciting market. We also see other side rights, we see a lot of things like different formats like audio and large print as well. They're often once the book's already been published, but we see those side of stuff. We also see things, as I say, like the kind of part work rights, but they kind of often come later on once it's already published. I would say the most we see is same languages, foreign rights, and is translations. I think an example of someone like Hugh is quite interesting in that he's kind of a very successful self-published author, but then he also has a huge network of traditional publishers around the world. I can't remember 28, 38 that he works with. So I think that is a kind of leading the way model of showing what's kind of possible in terms of actually retaining your your drive to be an independent author, which can remain completely undiminished, but yet work with a whole network of publishers around the world. I think often it's also very easy to, well, it's not easy, that's the wrong word, but you can now distribute in pretty much markets around the world, particularly digitally. So it also comes down to a choice of actually looking at markets and think, do I actually want to have my book available there, and in which case try and market it there, or do I want to actually think about what resource would be needed there, or do I actually want to license the rights into that market, in which case then you can look for a licensing deal. But I would look very widely, but I would certainly start with as Seth says, with the foreign language rights, both translation and same language.
And when you say same language, I'm interested in that because a lot of our authors would already have print in POD, print on demand edition through CreateSpace and or Ingram Spark. So does that cut across their ability to sell same language rights into a foreign market?
I mean, in all those agreements, they should be able to essentially stop distribution and allow distribution fairly straightforward. I think it comes down to the choice. It's like, we make business decisions, particularly in different countries, of thinking that are we in the best place, both not in terms of actually, well, firstly, can we push something in that market well enough? And secondly, is it worth our time to do so? And I think the same question is kind of relevant here. I would be thinking as an independent author, well, obviously the UK, if I'm based in the UK, I can kind of get behind it as much as possible. Maybe also in the US, where people like Ingram and Amazon and so on are very strong, but am I in the right place to also push that book in India? Maybe, but maybe I would also prefer to license my rights to an Indian publisher. I think one of the key things is the level of options. There's now so many options out there, which is a fantastic thing. And so it's kind of picking between them. Where do I want to license? Where do I want to distribute? And the kind
of absolutely. But I suppose what I'm trying to tease out here, and I'm just not sure of the answer to this question, is that if you have your POD through CreateSpace, through Ingram, that already has a presence on Amazon, and is there now. If you sell your English language rights then to an Indian publisher, what happens in the Indian Amazon store, for example? Your CreateSpace version fighting against your Indian publisher's version, does it have to be withdrawn? Have you seen any of these kinds of issues arising?
Well, it's part of the exclusivity that you grant when you make these decisions. Unfortunately, sometimes you regret decisions that you made. I know that some self-publishing platforms require exclusivity, others don't. I would say be wary of that. For your next book, make sure that you're getting what you want when you go into it. And that's the same with when you sell foreign rights. Make sure you're getting what you want. I always say that when you're making, whether it's a foreign rights decision or even a local decision, the territory is a huge, important piece of the contract. You need to make sure that the territory is covering the area you want it to cover. English and Spanish and French, these are widely spoken languages that you probably would want to break up the exclusivity of the territory. Whereas something like Bulgaria, one publisher could cover the whole world. There's not that many people that speak Bulgarian. But for some of these more popular, widely spoken languages, breaking up the territory probably behooves you and your goals. But if you've already given somebody exclusivity, there's not really much you can do. But if you have a deal that's non-exclusive, then you could do, you can do what you want. It's non-exclusive.
Have you come across that situation, Tom, with the POD edition? I mean, I guess a writer can always unpublish on Amazon if they decide to publish somewhere else. But if you unpublish on CreateSpace, you're not just going to unpublish in, for example, India. You're going to be unpublishing yourself in a lot of other places. Is this something you've come across?
Yes, I'm not sure. I mean, we get asked questions about exclusivity with authors, and IPR license purposely works on exclusivity and how we represent people because we don't believe it. We believe in creating business rather than necessarily constraining it. As far as I know, on KDP accounts, I know you can kind of set different territories and so on. Within CreateSpace, I'm not so familiar with, but kind of as Seth said, I think the key is to be prepared at the start. And to have that conversation, to look into the actual options and to think of the scenarios that, if you're thinking of, well, actually, I may want to sell the Indian rights, think about that from the start, and then look into what you're signing up from CreateSpace and find out, well, actually, is it worth me excluding them now if that's possible? And if it's not possible, then kind of what are the options? We get asked more by authors, actually, who finished either with traditional publishers or other publishers and kind of about reverting the rights back. We get a lot of questions about that because we see a lot of authors getting their rights and then coming and listing them on the platform. So it's, the IP, as I kind of started with, is the most valuable thing an author will own, and it's not to be given away cheaply or easily. It needs to be really thought about, rather than just ticking the terms and condition boxes. You kind of actually need to think, what am I actually giving away? Because it's the most valuable thing that any writer or creative person will own.
You're singing our song, Tom. We're always trying to encourage our members to actually read those terms and conditions before they tick the box and to look at contracts. And I'm just wondering, do you guys have anybody who helps? I mean, if you're going to get a contract from Bulgaria, Japan, Brazil, wherever, it's probably not going to be within the writer's remit to actually, or ability or capacity to fully understand what they're being offered or what's on the table. Do you guys help out in that way at all, or is it up to the writer themselves to have somebody who looks at that for them?
Sorry, Tom, go for it.
No, don't worry. Yeah, from our perspective, we don't. We have a team that kind of advise, but we also try and draw the line where we're not lawyers ultimately. So it reaches a point. What we're actually working on now is actually some specific lawyers to refer people to. So we try and help. We've got a team that try and help and advise, but up to a point at which point it's a very important area, we will then say you need to go and get advice, and we also have various associations, societies, lawyers that will direct people to.
Seth?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. Where we start our transaction system, which is not a requirement to use on our system. Our focus is marketing, but we do have a transaction aspect. And when you're at that point to where you want to transact, we sort of put it in your hands. We have sort of a new model for selling rights. There's always a conversation, and you get to that point where you're ready to agree with the rights buyer. But there are some rights, and in our experience, English language books seem to have the power to dictate certain things because they're mostly sought after, especially in like Asia, the Middle East, and something like that. So our platform says you decide what you're selling, and people agree with it or they don't. It's a new way of selling rights, and we're cognizant of that. We're trying to break new ground, and so we have information. We have articles that we reference that we point people to for how to do the research to price your rights and that sort of thing. And that also helps when you get an offer to know if you think it's fair or not. The thing is, as with selling books to readers, everything's sort of subjective. So what's good for one person might not be good for you.
Can a writer use your services and have an agent? Can they work well together? Is it possible for writers to kind of dig up leads and then bring them to their agent, or vice versa? Do you have that sort of crossover going on?
Yeah, agents tend to, everybody, publishers and agents, they like authors that market themselves. So our experience with agents is, agents use our platform to organize their information and to network with people. So they also like when authors are doing that themselves. You know, just like a publisher likes when you have a big social media following. An agent would like that you're helping them find leads. And our transaction system is built so that you can include the agent as part of the transaction. So it's just another platform for discoverability, but instead of for finding readers, it's for finding rights buyers. So publishers, agents, authors, they're happy to see the information out there. Exclusivity comes into play. So if you have an exclusive contract with an agent, you probably can't sell rights on any platform, whether it's PubMatch or IPR. It's the exclusivity of the contract you have with that agent. But marketing is marketing.
Interesting. And Tom, any comment on that, on the agent perspective? Because I hadn't really fully, I think, grasped that. I mean, most authors, in fairness to their agents, grant them, well, not most, but yeah, I think to a large extent, authors tend to hire an agent exclusively to do that sort of work for them. So, have you any commentary on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, we work with agents, I mean, and our accounts are set up in a way that actually, I mean, we have agent members who have a lot of authors within their accounts. We also, within authors, can actually link in agents to their accounts. So sometimes, authors may have agents that handle specific areas, so they want specific inquiries going to them. So we've built all this in. I think we realised at the outset, we also, not so much on the author side, but on publishers, we also we have scouts listed on the platform, agents of various different form, publishers. I sometimes, as you're probably also aware, the actual traditional chain in publishing is kind of became far too convoluted over the years. Not that each person doesn't play a particular role. So at the outset, we realised, well, we need to work within that chain. We want to be a solution rather than someone who's going to be chopping bits off and saying, well, kind of getting rid of anyone out of it. So therefore, we know we have to work with authors on their own. We'll work with authors with agents. We'll work with authors with publishers. The system's set up to kind of encompass it all.
Okay. Is there any place, we're coming close to the end of our session, unfortunately, we could talk about this for hours, I think. Is there any place where you would advise authors not to sell rights, foreign rights I'm thinking of now, translation rights particularly? Are there territories where you can handle things differently?
I mean, no, you go, you take it.
I think that I mean, I wouldn't advise anybody to straight up avoid any market. Every market has potential book buyers, potential readers there. But there are some markets that don't have good reputations necessarily in terms for piracy. But avoiding piracy is another reason why you'd want to sell rights. To be completely honest, if there's 15 different versions of your book in China that you didn't authorize, then you want to get an authorized version of your book into China. I think that there's a lot of homework that comes with selling rights. I use China as an example. There are only, I think, 500 actual official publishers in China, and if you're trying to sell rights in China, you need to make sure that you're working with a reputable publisher. Because if you're not, then there's no regulations. The sky's the limit with the terrible things they could do. Not that there's many terrible things that could be done, but there are markets that don't have great reputations. There are also markets that thrive on buying foreign rights. Markets that almost wouldn't exist without buying foreign rights, and China has a large percentage of foreign rights available. There are also lots of markets like the Middle East, the UAE specifically, Turkey, a few others I can't think of off the top of my head, but I could pass on some statistics of countries that have national funds and they have the grants that are specifically for importing and translating books. So every market's different. I just think if you get an inquiry, the first thing that I would do before sending a copy of your book, you could send a preview. I know on PubMatch and on IPR you could post a preview of your book, and I totally recommend doing that. But before you send the complete manuscript, just check out who's inquiring before you do that, no matter what country they're in.
Okay. Tom, anything you think writers should avoid?
I mean, yeah. I think I would look at it as more of a deal-by-deal basis, because I think, there are some countries that have better reputations than others in terms of contracts, in terms of paying for contracts and so on. But, there's also some, offerings to avoid, in the more established markets in the UK and in the US and whatever. And it kind of depends who you're with. China being, as Seth says, a good example in that, we have a partner in China, and there's actually some fantastic publishers in China, and it's a massive market. Actually, it's in line to be actually larger than the US market, I think, within 5 years in terms of size. So it's a great market to work within, but within that, there's also still a huge amount to avoid because of the lack of regulations in some areas. So it's looking deal by deal and kind of knowing those warning signs. I would, if I got an offer from a publisher, I'd want to, I'd look at what else they've published, what other deals, what other deals have they done, even basic things, look at them online, have they got someone to speak to, an office, all these type of things, so you can start to build up a picture of a reputable house, obviously make sure the contracts, very tight and so on, because what I wouldn't want to happen is, so I think that, you definitely need to be cautious to a degree, but you also shouldn't necessarily ignore some markets where there's huge growth as well. So, I mean, someone like Brazil's an obvious one, but also there's a lot of talk about certain markets in like Nigeria, which has in some ways a bad reputation in terms of piracy and so on. Actually, that's been said by some associations around the world to be a growth market that's going to be in terms of publishing. So I think, so you have to go in with your eyes wide open, but maybe just slightly squinted with cynicism at the same time.
That's probably a good piece of advice for the writing life generally. Okay, but we're going to go into all of this in a lot more detail and really drill down into the facts and so on in our book, which is coming next year, 2015, How Authors Sell Rights. And I know you're both going to contribute to that title, and we're very pleased that you will. And I think it's a fascinating area. I think it is, we're only dipping our toe in the water at the very, very beginning, and you're both doing, something that's really interesting, and I hope we will see the platforms becoming widely used by lots of authors and selling lots of rights. So thank you very much for your time, and if people want to get in touch with you directly, can you just give them Seth, you first? Where do they find you and PubMatch?
Yeah, sure. It's just pubmatch.com. You could email me at seth@pubmatch.com or on Twitter @PubMatchNetwork.
That's great. And both PubMatch and IPR have a very generous discounting arrangement in place for ALLi members. And where do they find you, Tom? Is it you they would speak to, or is it somebody in IPR license that our members can get in touch with?
No, I mean, feel free to get in touch with me directly. So it's www.iprlicense.com, license with S. And you can and we're on Twitter, so it's @IPRlicense. I'm also on Twitter @Tom_Chalmers, and you can also email me directly, which is Tom_Chalmers. Sorry, that's completely wrong. Tom.Chalmers, CHALMERS @IPRlicense.com.
There, he does want to be. He does want to be found.
Maybe that was subconscious.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed, and look forward to talking to you lots about rights in the coming year. Take care.
Thank you both. Bye bye.
Good night.